Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Spectre here on the 5x5 network. Good to have you aboard here on this New Year's Eve. Let a few of you guys cycle in here. Looks like we're up across the board. We got a Twitch up, YouTube up, D-Live up. A couple of you on Periscope tuning in. Good to have you aboard. It is New Year's Eve. We are finally winding down the year 2020, the year that it was. Hopefully each and every one of you have made it through with little fanfare, hopefully. Tonight on the broadcast, we're going to wrap up a couple series, or at least one of the series now that I'd been covering here on the Fireside Chats as of late. Out of the Blogmire, the 5-part series here, a little bit of a read-through, last part that came through. Pick up on another series, it's another 5-part series, another couple sections of that here tonight, couple things regarding the old year in review, as it were. And, of course, this being the last day of 2020. I haven't decided yet. I guess I'll have to wait for a few more of you guys to cycle in here, depending on where you're at around the country, as to which New Year's Eve ball we want to follow here. Do we want to go East Coast? Do we want to go Central? Where do we want to go? I am broadcasting out of the middle part of the country here, so my natural inclination would be to stay with the Central time zone here. But nothing else. I could probably do a little bit of a countdown here in about an hour's time for those that might sack out a little early on the East Coast. I don't know. We'll have to see. So, like I said, last fireside of the year. We'll be taking the stockings down, putting away the Christmas decorations, return to, just a normal, cozy fireside's net, perhaps a little snow falling in the background. We'll get back to those here. Yeah, good to see you. Kegel's out in Mesa. All right, well, you still got a couple hours yet. We're a little bit ahead of you. Let's see. Got a few of you guys tuning in from across the pond. Yeah, good to have you guys. You guys are a little bit ahead of us as well. There you go. Good evening. KH Farmer, Kegel, Sadie Lamp Duo. A couple of you guys over on the D-Live side as well. Good to have you aboard. So tonight, like I said, not much to share other than a couple articles now that I'll read behind the scenes here. Otherwise, sit back, relax, enjoy the fire. Grab your beverage of choice, whatever that may be. Perhaps tonight, to ring in the new year, you'll have a little sparkly, bubbly, whatever. We'll raise a glass here. Those fireworks we hear? Not here. I've had some yin-yangs in town here throw a few off here about an hour and a half ago. But I don't know. Maybe we'll see something here later on in the evening. We got some interesting folks that live in the neighborhood, so who knows? Your neighborhood is like a war zone. All right. Yeah. Well, maybe we'll do a little fireworks of our own here toward the next couple hours. We'll see. All right, so that being said, let me just get into one of the articles now to round out the series now we were talking about out of the Blogmire. The 2020 was a year that God still proclaims good tidings of great joy. And, well, speak of the devil, there's the fireworks behind the scenes. All right, and suddenly there was with the angel a multitude of the heavenly host praising God and saying, Glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace, goodwill toward men. 2020 was an epoch-defining year. It wasn't, as many suppose, a year in which we experienced a public health crisis, which governments then did their very best to manage our way through, so that we can eventually come out the other end and go back to the lives we were living before. No, something changed, and a whole Pandora's box was opened to unleash a torrent of great evils that will not easily be put back. I'm not even talking here about the Great Reset, that insidious and sinister project, which is not the paranoid delusion of some overweight, basement-dwelling, video game-playing dweeb with an affinity for aluminum, but rather the open aim and purpose of some extremely powerful organizations and individuals across the globe. Rather, I am simply talking about the fact of human nature. whereby having failed to recognize the warnings bleeping off all around us, and having chosen the comfortable option of going along with the epic lies of the government and media, rather than the uncomfortable alternative of confronting these epic lies, we are now embarked on a voyage of becoming accustomed to things that were previously unthinkable. 2020 was the year that we were subject to what was the biggest psychological, economic, and social test ever carried out. And 2021 will no doubt see many of the consequences come home to roost. Mass unemployment, the closure of thousands of small businesses, the hollowing out of town centers, the psychological damage of so-called social distancing and mask wearing, particularly on the lives of a multitude of children, the plunging into poverty of millions, the continuation of authoritarianism in government and police, the looming threat of civil unrest, and on top of these things, those in charge of the asylum have already prepped us that despite the alleged salvation by vaccine, we can continue to expect more of the same, including prolonged social distancing, mask wearing, lockdowns, and no doubt a plethora of new, brightly colored, infantile slogans. And all of it totally unnecessary. As one of the world's top proper scientists, Professor Sucharit Bhakti, makes clear in this interview, which the gatekeepers at YouTube have banned. It has indeed been a dark, unfathomable year. And given that actions do still have consequences, even unintended ones, it is unlikely that 2021 is going to be a picnic on a summer's day. Yet, in the midst of it all, hope shines far greater than the gathering darkness. There, peeping among the cloud rack above a dark fir high up in the mountains, Sam saw a white star twinkle for a while. The beauty of it smote his heart as he looked up out of the forsaken land, and hope returned to him. For like a shaft, clear and cold, the thought pierced him that in the end of the shadow was only a small and passing thing. There was light and high beauty forever beyond its reach. Quote via J.R.R. Tolkien. What Sam Gamgee saw was a small shaft of light, nothing compared to the seemingly endless darkness around it, and yet ultimately far, far greater, a light beyond the darkness, separate from the darkness, piercing through the darkness. If they could have gotten away with it, the wretched killjoys who have been killing joy all year would have banned Christmas altogether for everyone. As it is, they have gone out of their way to insist that your Christmas be as paltry, as insipid, as miserable as they themselves are. They want you to have a Christmas made in their image, but it must not be so. And the angel said unto them, Fear not, for, behold, I bring you good tidings of great joy, which shall be to all people. For unto you is born this day in the city of David a Saviour, which is Christ the Lord. And this shall be a sign unto you. Ye shall find the babe wrapped in swaddling clothes, lying in a manger. And suddenly there was with the angel a multitude of the heavenly host, praising God, and saying, Glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace, goodwill toward men. And of course that's a passage out of Luke 2:10 through 14. Hush now, ye heavenly host. Don't you know there's a virus about? Do stop that loud singing, and do stay well apart from one another to show a good example of social distancing to the people. And shouldn't you be wearing masks? Oh, and what a good thing Joseph and Mary were turned away from the inn, because, they hadn't downloaded the Track and Trace app, and their presence would have made it COVID insecure. And for pity's sake, stop all that stuff about having no fear and rejoicing. Have you not heard the message proclaimed by Matt Hancock, the Secretary of State for Misery? It really is deeply irresponsible, and you all need to remain permanently petrified and joyless. Bah humbug! Let me travel with you, O ye rulers of the earth. At Christmas time we celebrate the coming into the world of the Lord of glory, the light of the world, the Prince of Peace. He came to live to die, and to die to live. He came that he might ascend to the right hand of the Father, and where he rules the nations, and shall do so until he has put all his enemies under his feet. This is no time for your hysteria-driven nonsense. It is no time for the insipid world you are trying to create. It is no time for the Covidian joylessness you have determined to foist upon this land for reasons known to yourselves. It's time for rejoicing because the birth of Christ is tidings of great joy. It is time for thanksgiving because the Lord has come. It is time to join in loud praise with the heavenly host because the light of the world, from far beyond the shadow, descended from on high and brought with him peace, goodwill toward men. The Covidian state is the wretched creation of miserable technocrats. Yet, in the grand scheme of things, it is only a small and passing thing, a shadow and a light affliction, when set beside the eternal weight of glory. So look up, let hope return, let beauty smite your heart, for God has sent us his Son, the King, who has opened the way of salvation and the path to eternal joy. Keep the feast, celebrate with joy, and may you be greatly blessed this Christmas. And I'll add to that New Year's as well. All right? We're not out of the darkness yet, folks, but I will say this. It's always darkest before the light, right? In just 6 days here, we're going to find out who has been naughty and nice. We're going to be making a list and checking it twice, who the patriots versus traitors are, at least in this country, if you're following what's been going on. And so, we are on this precipice. We are in wait, and wait we shall. Wait on the Lord. Here's to an amazing 2021 and the amazing patriots that supported so many of us. Thank you, 5x5. Yes, indeed. Knock my socks off. Happy New Year, patriots. Already had our party. I'm tipsy. Time for Betty Bye time. Alright, well, there's that. Happy New Year from Cumbria, UK. Good to see you. Stephen Hollis, good to see you. Yeah, let's see. No way you're making it till midnight? Oh, come on now. You can do it, Cage Farmer. Well, there we go. Alright. Well, to continue on. Again, picking up a series that I've been reading from out of the Burning Platform blog. Talking about, are we really going to build back better after a dark winter? This is part 2 of the series. So in part 1 of this article, I laid out the case, the dark winter narrative, and how an experimental vaccine marketed like a tech product by Big Pharma and their cronies are part of a globalist scheme to reset the world and force us into subservience. Now, we get to Biden's campaign slogan, which began to be adopted in August of 2020, and was beaten like a dead horse just before and after the rigged election. Build back better. Must have played well among the useless eater, mouth-breather demographic when tested by Biden's handlers. Biden would pop his head out of the basement periodically to stumble through a teleprompter speech where he was instructed to utter, "Build back better," 3 or 4 times. And by the way, if you've followed some of my work here as of late, you know that the Global Reset folks have used a similar mantra. And we talked about this on Wednesday as well, when we had DD on the show. Says then the contemptibility compliant corporate media expounded on the narrative as a brilliant plan by the wise statesman Joe Biden to save America from the murderous machinations of the evil orange man. Again, Google Trends reveals the coordinated effort to use this phrase in their efforts to steal the presidential election. If you think this was just a brilliant strategy by Biden's handlers, you haven't been paying attention. This is the globalist slogan to change the world. Build Back Better has been a globalist slogan for over a decade. The definition for our friends at the UN is, and I quote, a holistic concept using post-disaster reconstruction and recovery as an opportunity to improve a community's physical, social, environmental, and economic conditions to create a more resilient community in an effective and efficient way. End quote. Now, you get the gist of why the slogan is being flogged to death by not only Biden, but his globalist colleagues around the globe. They need a disaster to build a new world in the image they desire. Green, global control, depopulation, MMT, and ruled by oligarchs like Gates, Soros, Bloomberg, Schwab, and the rest of the Davos crowd. They see the deaths of a few million people as an opportunity to lock down and control the planet. And a quote out of Klaus Schwab himself says the pandemic represents a rare but narrow window of opportunity to reflect, reimagine, and reset our world. Thus saith the Klaus Schwab. You begin to understand the basis for this catchphrase when you research its origins. It first surfaced in a 2009 UN press release marking International Mother Earth Day, a made-up globalist holiday. The UN used the fake climate crisis to urge governments to build back better by creating a more sustainable, resilient, and inclusive societies after the financial crisis. Never let a good crisis go to waste. Bill Clinton and UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon used the phrase in 2009 regarding Haiti. How did that work out for Haitians? That would be called the Global Ripoff Scheme by the Clinton Foundation. BBB also refers to the official Sendai framework of disaster recovery that was adopted in the UN World Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction in Sendai, Japan in 2015. The World Bank also uses the phrase in its Unbreakable report, which details the devastation disasters have on poor communities. It highlights the need to build back better after meeting essential needs in poor communities. This phrase reeks of a globalist agenda. The European Commission used the phrase in May of this year when announcing their €750 billion stimulus fund to build back better through channels that contribute to a greener, more sustainable, and resilient society. Meaning, no fossil fuels, massive tax increases, and obeying those who know what's best for you. I'm surprised they haven't rolled out a new sitcom called Soros Knows Best. Of course, our favorite vacuous blackface male model PM Justin Trudeau virtue signaled his allegiance to the globalist green agenda in August, saying, "We need to reset the approach of this government for a recovery to build back better." Another Soros protege, totalitarian extraordinaire Jacinda Ardern, New Zealand's PM, has fervently used the assigned phrase when bloviating about her green recovery plans. Next on the agenda are climate lockdowns. Lastly, we have globalist food/tool Boris Johnson, when he isn't busy canceling Christmas based on junk science, doing as he is told and uttering his Build Back Better lines as the UK descends into an Orwellian dystopian nightmare. These billionaire-funded egomaniacal authoritarians must have a disaster in order to build back better from. Essentially, this globalist plot to change the world is exploiting this overhyped coronavirus pandemic to initiate Schwab's Great Reset, where the serfs will own nothing and be happy, while the oligarch lords and their apparatchiks live lives of luxury and plenty, inflicting mandates and regulations upon their subjects. The coronavirus crisis will be replaced with the climate crisis as the creation of perpetual disaster allows the globalists to implement their master new world order plan. Everything happening in the world is interconnected and part of a sinister plot to control the world. The disaster is not the coronavirus, but the purposeful destruction of the global economic system by these evil men and women. The lockdowns, mandatory masking, debt creation, and destruction of small businesses is necessary for these corporate fascist globalists to destroy our existing way of life, to reset the world in their warped, dystopian vision. Google Trends once again exposes their master plans, as Klaus Schwab's Great Reset scheme coincided with Biden's Dark Winter and Build Back Better narrative to psychologically condition the masses for their plan to transform a world of independent nations acting in their best interests, with citizens free to live their lives in a way of their choosing, operating within community standards and agreed upon rules, and able to climb as high as their talents and ambitions take them, to a world ruled by oligarchs, where the people are treated like cattle, freedoms restricted, free thought censored, and all communications electronically surveilled, with the threat of imprisonment and capital punishment for those who do not bend the knee. Schwab published his book COVID-19, The Great Reset, in July 2020 in conjunction with the massive increase in purposely flawed PCR testing, guaranteed to generate enough false positives to scare the world into Great Reset submission. They are no longer operating in the shadows, but feel emboldened by this fake pandemic disaster to lay out their utopian plans to control our lives, because their hubris knows no bounds. Schwab's rationale for resetting the world, as laid out in his book, is as follows. COVID-19 has plunged the world into the most challenging times in generations. The world has changed forever, creating economic, social, and environmental disruptions. Millions of companies risk falling behind, and few will thrive. Life as we know it is unraveling, offering the opportunity for transformation and reimagination. The sudden and violent nature of the shock is overwhelming, as unemployment can cause social unrest and mass migration. The world is systematically connected and must act as one and evolve to address extreme consequences of disaster like COVID-19. The dramatic rise in unemployment, global social unrest caused by BLM, and growing tension between China and the U.S. were exacerbated by the pandemic. We are at a critical juncture where the potential for change is unlimited and only bound by our imagination. Societies need to be more equitable, exhibiting solidarity, looking to the needs of the many, with economies more inclusive and dismantling the status quo. The success of the Great Reset requires immense change, creating a new social contract, international collaboration, and investment in the environment. Building Back Better needs to be adopted by leaders around the world, and stimulus packages must include climate initiatives to achieve the goals of Agenda 2030. Welcome to 2030. I own nothing, have no privacy, and life has never been better. Klaus and his billionaire buddies have big plans, and this faux pandemic crisis was the perfect quote-unquote opportunity to achieve their globalist corporate Marxist dreams. Wealthy, powerful oligarchs believing forcing their warped totalitarian ideas upon the world by any means necessary. The ends always justify the means, no matter how deceitful and evil the means, for these arrogant sociopaths. Schwab and his ilk are skilled at using what appears to be sensible language when they are attempting to subvert our constitutional rights, while imposing draconian tyrannical measures without the consent of the governed. Schwab feigns concern for the millions of small businesses that have been purposefully destroyed by the lockdown mandates he and his allies supported wholeheartedly, while being in the pocket of Bezos, Zuckerberg, Dorsey, and the rest of the mega corporations who have reaped obscene profits from this plandemic. The plan has been to destroy small businesses so the connected corporations could harvest their customers. Schwab is almost giddy at the prospects of an unraveling world where he and his accomplices, who believe they can control an infinitely complex world because they are the smartest guys in the room, can implement centralized control using their Marxist, neo-feudal dogmas. Marxism is based upon the abolition of private property. So their "you will own nothing and be happy" slogan tells you all you need to know. The world must act jointly and swiftly to revamp all aspects of our societies and economies, from education to social contracts and working conditions. Every country, from the United States to China, must participate, and every industry, from oil and gas to tech, must be transformed. Words directly out of the mouth of Klaus Schwab. They are using the surge in unemployment and the social unrest caused by the Black Lives Matter narrative as the imperative for a coordinated global transformation of the world as they want it to be. We are supposed to trust the people who created the mass unemployment through senseless lockdowns and encouraged the BLM and Antifa terrorists to loot, burn, and destroy small businesses in cities across America. Their green agenda spokes morons, AOC and Greta, are perfect representatives for the idiocy of their movement. They are purposely tearing our society apart from their mandatory masking and demanding humans fear other humans as disease-carrying parasites, as a fearful, depressed, and unemployed populace is easily manipulated and bribable with their own tax money, distributed to them by the government that has ruined their lives. $600, anyone? Chaos, bankruptcy, and dehumanization are an essential ingredient in a successful reset. These are the results purposely initiated by Democrat governors and mayors to achieve their goals. Murder increases in 2020. Atlanta, 58%. Chicago, 56%. Dallas, 24%. LA, 31%. New York City, 39%. Minnesota, 74%. Philly, 39%. San Francisco, 32%. But hey, everybody, let's defund the police, right? Their techno-fascist style of green Marxism is being funded by the Wall Street-owned Federal Reserve and their central banker collaborators in Europe and Asia, promoted by their corporate media partners, bankrolled by Soros, Gates, Bloomberg, and other left-wing oligarchs, codified into the political realm by captured, corrupt politicians, supported by megacorporations who have vacuumed up the profits of the 40% of small businesses that have been forced out of business by these traitorous degenerates, and enabled by the Silicon Valley billionaire social media oppressive censorship police. Their goal is to have government surrender their sovereignty to a small cadre of elites who want to subjugate the world under their sole technocratic domination. They initiated their new normal narrative in May 2020 to condition the masses into believing things could never go back to the way they were, which qualifies as the big lie of our time. And in part 3 of this article, J.R.R. Tolkien will provide guidance for those of us choosing to fight the Great Reset agenda of the globalist oligarchs. And that's what we're going to cover next is part 3. The subsequent portions of this series have not yet come out. We'll cover that again on later fireside chats here. Give us pause to think about the things that are coming down the pike and how we fight back. Make no mistake, 2020 may be out the window, but 2021, they will learn to fear the populace. You're absolutely right. It is okay to have righteous anger. Absolutely. So carrying on, part 3 of this series, are we really going to build back better after a dark winter? Part 3. In part 1 of this article, I laid out the case, the dark winter narrative, and how an experimental vaccine marketed like a tech product by Big Pharma and their cronies are part of a globalist scheme to reset the world and force us into subservience. Part 2 that we just covered of the article, I revealed how the Build Back Better narrative is part of Klaus Schwab's Great Reset plan to implement a one-world command and control dystopia managed by billionaire oligarchs and their dark forces. Their new normal tripe is built on a foundation of falsity. The Spanish flu pandemic of 1918 killed 50 million people when the population of Earth was 1.8 billion, or 2.8% of the world population. This China flu has contributed to the deaths of 1.8 million people with a worldwide population of 7.8 billion, or 0.023%. The world was not locked down by totalitarians. No vaccine was created. The flu dissipated over time, probably due to natural herd immunity. People continued to live their lives, and the world returned to normal without global elites dictating how we had to live. There is no such thing as a new normal. There is normal and abnormal. What we are experiencing today is a warped, stage-managed abnormality being jammed down our throats by men who will benefit greatly if we let them take over the world, with no downside risk for themselves when their harebrained ideas tragically fail. Allowing all businesses to open, allowing all workers to work, ending the masking farce, opening schools, guaranteeing freedom of speech on social media platforms, restoring the freedoms and liberties of citizens, not forcing a DNA-changing vaccine upon those who do not want it, protecting the old and infirm, and letting the virus run its course, will allow us to go back to normal. These wealthy, powerful tyrants will not allow this to happen without a fight to the finish. In this hour, I do not believe that any darkness will endure. J.R.R. Tolkien out of The Return of the King. You can only come to the morning through the shadows. Yet another quote by J.R.R. Tolkien. I find the words of Tolkien inspiring and hopeful in this time of danger and deceit. To those of us who still believe the founding principles of our country, as documented in the Constitution, need to be upheld and honored by those we have chosen to represent us. A darkness has descended upon our world, endangering our way of life, and threatening to turn the world into a communist nightmare of impoverishment, retribution, and one-world government run by billionaire oligarchs and their worthless, bureaucratic state cronies. The carefree, bright days of the Shire are long gone, and the Eye of Sauron has set its gaze upon the deplorable hobbits trying to regain their way of life by embarking on a journey to confront the forces of evil arrayed against them. The primary themes of Tolkien's masterpiece are the corrupting influence of power and the inevitability of decline in all civilizations. A dark winter will entomb the nation if Basement Biden assumes power on January 20th, 2021. This will mean the corrupt, powerful forces of tyranny will have successfully pulled off their election coup. The corrupting influence of power is clearly seen in the likes of Gates, Bezos, Bloomberg, Zuckerberg, and Dorsey, as their success in creating businesses and reaping massive riches makes them believe their political beliefs should hold sway over the masses, while they use their extreme wealth to influence elections and control the administration of the world. This corruption of power turns these men into perverted, arrogant creatures, seeking further wealth, power, and control. Soros represents the wretched, demented, golem-like creature in our current-day battle for Middle-earth, consumed by desire for the power of the ring, the New World Order. Biden, Schwab, Soros, and their Antifa and BLM orcs are already at war, and it is time for us to defend what is dear. War must be while we defend our lives against a destroyer who would devour all. But I do not love the bright sword for its sharpness, nor the arrow for its swiftness, nor the warrior for his glory. I love only that which they defend. Another quote via J.R.R. Tolkien of the Two Towers. The treacherous are ever distrustful. Yet another quote, same book from Tolkien. The inevitability of decline is true for humans, as well as civilizations, empires, and ages. The Great Reset Davos crowd wants to transform our world into a green utopia, ruled by those who fervently believe they are more intelligent than those they rule, because they equate ill-gotten wealth with intellectual superiority. The truth is, these narcissistic, psychopath lords are going to die. Just like the serfs, they want to entrap in servitude to their one world government. Gates, Soros, Bloomberg, Bezos, Zuckerberg, and the rest of Great Reset mob do not deserve our admiration, but our scorn and contempt. They are consumed by their self-importance and avarice for complete control over those they see as nothing more than cattle. Coercion, impoverishment, and fear are their tools, and domination is their goal. They appear to have the upper hand, as people around the globe cower in fear as the eye of Sauron, or the COVID-19, is turned in their direction. Despair fills the air. It is not despair, for despair is only for those who see the end beyond all doubt. We do not. J.R.R. Tolkien, The Fellowship of the Ring. It isn't a coincidence Tolkien wrote his epic battle between good and evil during the last fourth turning. The existing order is always swept away during a fourth turning and replaced by something, better or worse. That is why I find its theme so prevalent as we confront our own epic battle with the forces of evil. Many are praying their great champion, Trump, will arrive with the forces of good at the climactic battle of the D.C. swamp before January 20th, just as Gandalf the Grey arrived, just in time at the Battle of Helm's Deep to turn the tide and defeat the forces of evil. I'm not counting on such a glorious outcome, as there will be many battles to be fought on many fronts before victory can be secured, with future generations honoring glorious heroes long deceased. But it is also not time to be forlorn. Oft hope is born when all is forlorn. J.R.R. Tolkien out of The Return of the King. Waiting to be saved from the Great Reset by a white hat brigade is not a feasible strategy for victory. Every person whose eyes have been opened to the plans and of these tyrants has a part to play. The key ingredients to defeating these malevolent forces are courage and truth. You may consider yourself an insignificant cog in the machine, without the capacity to fight billionaire despots and autocratic government officials. But you are not insignificant. This war may ultimately require those 300 million firearms be put to use, but direct confrontation against a heavily armed government force is a losing proposition. Winning will require guile, guerrilla tactics, turning their technology into a liability, and the courage to say no to their mandates and unconstitutional decrees. Frodo and his Fellowship of the Ring did not directly confront the powerful forces of Sauron. They outsmarted him. Each of us can do our part based upon our talents, resources, judgment, daring, and cleverness. Courage is found in unlikely places. Yet another quote via J.R.R. Tolkien. There are numerous ways to fight this dehumanization campaign being waged by these godless opportunists. Choose not to participate in their masking charade. Do not let them jab you with their DNA-altering poison. Use facts and reason to convince others masks are worthless, and the vaccine is nothing but an enrichment scheme for Gates, Fauci, and Big Pharma. Support small businesses and restaurants that flaunt tyrannical lockdown mandates. Reduce your tax footprint by opting out of this materialistic paradigm. Get healthier by exercising, eating unprocessed food, and taking supplements like B, D, and C. Barter with local farmers or pay in cash to deny Caesar his cut. Plant as big a garden as possible based on your circumstances. Make sure you have guns, ammo, and training. Join protests against this oppression. Build resiliency into your daily life. Think for yourself. Never watch or read anything in the mainstream media. Do not believe anything the government tells you without verifying the facts. If the social media titans ban someone, seek out their writings because they must be telling the truth. If Google takes down a YouTube video, seek it out on BitChute or other platforms. Nothing strengthens authority so much as silence. Quote via Leonardo da Vinci. For those with a particular talent in IT, electrical, or mechanical, be prepared to utilize those skills in confronting the oligarchy. If possible, use encryption messaging to defeat the surveillance state. Protect your loved ones. Make sure you know who you can trust. Find neighbors of like mind. Make yourself anti-fragile by having alternative means of power and alternative medicines in supply. Attempt to open the eyes of those blinded by decades of propaganda exposure. Remove any funds from Wall Street banks. Diversify your financial holdings, whether it be land, cash, metals, or even crypto. Stay as far away from urban ghettos as possible. Speak truth to power. Don't lose faith. The truth is on our side. We can win this war for the soul of our country. We have a limited amount of time on this earth. We must use what time is left to protect the world from these degenerates and provide future generations with a humanistic world where they have choices, liberty, and freedom. I wish we weren't confronted with such a Herculean task, but it has happened in our time. I wish it needed not have happened in my time, said Frodo. So do I, said Gandalf, and so do all who live to see such times. But that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us. Again, out of J.R.R. Tolkien. We cannot let the new normal or Great Reset take hold. If it is up to Klaus and his crew, you will be permanently masked, mandatorily vaccinated, eternally locked down, perpetually impoverished, and forever dependent upon a central authority to provide minimal sustenance and maximum punishment for disobedience. Even as the dark clouds fill the distant sky, and the future appears bleak, our roots are strong and will not wither under the approaching tempest. The fight is before us, and the outcome uncertain, but there is some good in this world, and it is worth fighting for. The sun will surely come out again when this dark shadow passes. There you go. Part 3 of the series. Again, we'll pick up the latter parts here in subsequent firesides. Lots of good quotes out of Tolkien. A couple of the books Nat referenced if you've not read. What was it? The Two Towers, I believe, was one. The Return of the King. The Fellowship of the Ring. Just to name a couple, 2, 3 that were quoted from in here this evening. Very, very interesting. All is not lost. We still have time. God is on our side. If God is for us, who can possibly be against us? Right? Plenty of time for things to turn around. And at the end of the day, 20th of January is the only date that really matters for those of us here stateside. So we shall see. All right, well, moving along. Why don't I let this play through? POTUS had some words today in regards to the new year. I'm going to let this play in the background, take about 4 or 5 minutes to play through, so take a listen.
In the face of great challenges this year, Americans showed incredible grit, strength, tenacity, and resolve, and together we achieved truly historic victories like nobody ever thought possible. To defeat the China virus, we launched the largest mobilization since World War II. We transformed our factories to build tens of thousands of ventilators and millions of masks virtually overnight. Nobody thought it could be done. We ignored the experts who demanded open borders, and we shut down travel from China and Europe to protect our citizens, and we built the wall. We pioneered groundbreaking new therapies and treatments, and we saved millions of American lives. Over and over again, we were told it would be impossible to deliver a vaccine by the end of the year. All of the experts said, absolutely unthinkable. Trump is exaggerating. It can't happen. And we did it long before the end of the year. They said it would take a medical miracle, and that's exactly what it is. Years from now, they'll be talking about it. They'll be talking about this great thing that we did with the vaccines. A truly unprecedented, amazing medical miracle. Normally, developing a vaccine takes up to 10 years. Thanks to Operation Warp Speed, we developed a vaccine in just 9 months. We've already begun a nationwide vaccination program, and we're sending the vaccine all over the world. The world will benefit, we'll benefit, and everybody's calling to thank me. Our most vulnerable citizens are already receiving the vaccine, and millions of doses are quickly being shipped all across our country. By early next year, the vaccine will be available to every American, and shortly thereafter, it will be delivered worldwide. We will end the pandemic once and for all. This is one of the most extraordinary scientific, industrial, and medical feats in history. Everybody has it as that. That's what they're marketed down as. And we can never let people forget where it came from and how it came. We're very proud to be honored, and all of the people that worked so hard on it, we have to be remembered for what's been done. I want to thank all of the workers, scientists, doctors, and members of the military who helped make Operation Warp Speed possible. Before the pandemic, we built the greatest economy in the history of the world. Now we are doing it again. We've actually built, if you think about it, 2 great economies, before and after. We passed $3 trillion in relief, the largest financial aid package in history. Through the Paycheck Protection Program, we saved or supported more than 51 million American jobs, and we're doing numbers now like nobody's ever seen before, including having the highest stock market in the history of the world. I froze student loan payments, stopped evictions, suspended payroll taxes. We have slashed the unemployment rate from 14.7% all the way down to 6.7%. And a lot of people thought that the 14.7 could be 32 or 40 or 45%. And now we're down to 6.7 and heading a lot lower. We made it dramatically better than experts predicted just a few months ago. Our economy is growing at the most rapid rate ever recorded, 33.4% last quarter, and much faster than the nations of Europe. Nobody can compete with us in terms of going down less and going up by far the fastest and the best. Whenever America is challenged, we always rise to the occasion. We are bringing critical medical manufacturing back home to America. We have secured our borders and paused immigration to protect American workers. We lowered drug prices for the first time in 51 years. And after years of endless foreign wars, we are signing historic peace deals in the Middle East. It's all ending in the Middle East. We have to hope it keeps going. It's so easy if you know what you're doing. In this season of joy, Americans have so much to be grateful for. We're all blessed to live in the greatest country ever to exist on the face of the earth, and we have made it greater than ever before. As long as we remain loyal to our nation, devoted to our citizens, and faithful to Almighty God, we know that the best is yet to come. God bless you, and God bless America.
In the words of POTUS here today, kicked out just before 1 o'clock this afternoon. Had a couple other tweets come through. Says, finish off the year at the highest stock market in history, setting records with your 401ks, just like I said you would. Congratulations to all. And also talking about Senator Hawley and the fact that Walmart came out against him. Some nitwit over at Walmart decided they wanted to use the Walmart account to come out and call him a sore loser. Well, I'm afraid some of these folks are going to find out they're on the wrong side of history, whether it be the Walmarts, whether it be the Pfizers, the GlaxoSmithKlines, and others who, as you just heard POTUS mention in his quick take there, said they lowered drug prices, well, in an act of utter defiance. Article here this evening says that Pfizer, GSK, and others quietly hiked prices on hundreds of drugs, not to mention the fact that they went around him shortly after Biden was declared the president-elect, mind you, by the Mockingbird media, and gave their team the results of what was coming before POTUS. These guys, I think, are going to be in for a world of hurt once they find out who really gets sworn in on the 20th. Not going to be good for them. Let's see. Also, POTUS retweeting the first at the first on TV. Joe Biden did a victory lap, but had a lot of trouble speaking, and there was one major thing missing from his speech, says at Bill O'Reilly. Plus, a forensic audit of Dominion machines out of Michigan alleges the rampant computer errors tainted the results in a big way. And POTUS apparently still tweeting here this evening here through the broadcast, highlighting, it looks like Pearson Sharp over at OAN, little clip there, and also a little piece from OAN, President Trump's road to victory. So let me see if I can let that play through real quick.
The battle continues for the White House as President Trump and his legal team continue to reveal and investigate the irregularities of the 2020 election. President Trump has several avenues to secure his second term. Primarily, the state legislatures have the constitutional authority and responsibility to select the correct electors for their respective states. 7 states had both sets of electors vote on December 14th. Pennsylvania, Georgia, Michigan, Wisconsin, Arizona, Nevada, and New Mexico all had Republican electors cast their votes, as well as the Democrat electors. Currently, all 7 of the state secretaries of state have sent the Democrat electors to be counted. The state legislatures have the constitutional responsibility to ensure that the electors sent from their state are correct. The state legislators can effectively overrule the secretaries of state and either select the Republican electors or decertify the Democrat electors. Hearings and evidentiary discussions have been taking place for weeks, and several of the legislators have concerns that the wrong electors from their states were selected. President Trump needs 3 of the states to invalidate the Democrat electors or select the Republican electors. Another option for President Trump is the Supreme Court. Pennsylvania, Arizona, Wisconsin, and possibly Georgia have cases at the Supreme Court that could combine. Those 3 states have enough electors to switch the outcome of the election. The United States Congress could also play a role in the election. If the electors are uncertain or contested, Congress would vote for the president, 1 vote per state. There are currently more Republican states than Democrat states, which would give Trump an advantage. Democrats would have to flip Republican states and get them to vote Democrat. The Trump campaign has also benefited from local citizens speaking out. State legislators have been inundated by phone calls, emails, and protests telling the legislators that they believe the election was stolen and want transparency. The fact that so many state leaders are refusing hearings and refusing to allow evidence to be presented is very unusual and a bit suspicious. Many citizens have questions about why local leaders are preventing access to the machines. In the 2000 election dispute, both sides examined the hanging Chad. Local leaders are effectively telling the Trump campaign, you cannot examine the ballots and we will tell you what we think you have the right to know. That's not sitting well with many Americans. The more Americans that contact their local leader, the greater the possibility of truth and transparency in the election. If you live in a contested state and have concerns about election integrity, contact your state and local leaders and let them know. I'm Christina Bobb, One America News, Palm Beach, Florida.
And there you go, a little outtake that POTUS retweeted here just as we went into broadcast here this evening. And she's absolutely right. Article coming through here today says we're now up to about 140 congressmen, potentially. Although the list in the particular article didn't cite 140, they suspect it could be in the hundreds. A lot of congressmen from the House side as well as Senator Hawley. A lot of people are questioning whether or not people like Rand Paul and perhaps even Ted Cruz are going to join the fray. We'll have to see. And of course, not to throw any more shade on the situation, but then you got some outlets saying that perhaps the McConnells and Pelosi's may try and thwart this by introducing rule changes to prevent any sort of disruptions to the process. Well, there's this little thing Pelosi and McConnell called the Constitution, and I don't care what sort of little rinky-dink rules that you guys try to put upon your fellow folks in Congress. But yeah, guess what? The Constitution overrules that, and ultimately it's going to come down to Pence when it's said and done on the 6th. And of course, if you've been paying attention, you know that he was to take a trip immediately thereafter and has now canceled said trip. So the stakes couldn't certainly be higher. All right, that being said, another interesting article for the evening. Again, if you're just joining here on the broadcast, we got about a little over an hour to go before we're going to ring in the new year. We just wrapped up a series now that I've been covering here on the fireside chats for the evening. One out of the Blogmire, part 5, and then we're picking up another series out of the Burning Platform here. We'll pick those up again. But another interesting article says a year in which comforting American myths were ravaged. So now we'll get into a little bit of the 2020 in review type articles. Thanks in large part to COVID lockdowns, this year has left vast wreckage in its wake. With 10 million jobs lost, more than 100,000 businesses, and dozens of national chains bankrupted or closed, up to 40 million people could face eviction in the coming months for failing to pay rent. And Americans report that their mental health is at record low levels. But the casualty list for 2020 must also include many of the political myths that shape American lives. Perhaps the biggest myth to die this year was that Americans' constitutional rights are safeguarded by the Bill of Rights. After the COVID-19 pandemic began, governors in state after state effectively placed scores of millions of citizens under house arrest. Dictates that former Attorney General Bill Barr aptly compared to, quote, the greatest intrusion on civil liberties, end quote, since the end of slavery. Politicians and government officials merely had to issue decrees which were endlessly amended in order to destroy citizens' freedoms of movement, freedom of association, and freedom of choice in daily life. LA earlier this month banned almost all walking and bicycling in the city, ordering 4 million people to remain in their homes in a futile effort to banish a virus. The rule of law is yet another myth impaled by 2020's dire developments. Courts have repeatedly struck down sweeping restrictions. Federal Judge William Stickman IV invalidated some of Pennsylvania's restrictions in a September ruling. Broad population-wide lockdowns are such a dramatic inversion of the concept of liberty in a free society as to be nearly presumptively unconstitutional. After the Michigan Supreme Court effectively labeled Governor Gretchen Whitmer a lawless dictator, she responded by issuing new COVID-19 emergency orders that are nearly identical to her invalidated emergency orders, as the Mackinac Center noted. How many governors and mayors have you seen on television news being led away in handcuffs after their arrest for violating citizens' rights this year? Anyone? None. That's the correct answer. 0. Another myth that 2020 obliterated was the notion that politicians spending more than $100 billion every year for science and public health would keep Americans safe. And by the way, if you were with us here back on Tuesday, we covered a little piece called the Festivus book that Senator Rand Paul has put out now for the better part of 3 years, highlighting the waste and disgusting spending to these institutions across the board. It's enough to make you sick. This on top of the bloviated porculus bill that they tried to ram through. The Centers for Disease Control utterly botched the initial testing regime, sending out bogus tests to state and local health departments and taking a month and a half to do what the Thai government achieved in 1 day. The Food and Drug Administration helped turn the coronavirus from a deadly peril into a national catastrophe. Long after foreign nations had been ravaged and many cases had been detected in America, the FDA continued blocking private testing. The FDA continued forcing the nation's most innovative firms to submit to its command and control approach, notwithstanding the pandemic. The benevolence and compassion of public school teachers was another myth that 2020 obliterated. Teacher unions helped barricade school doors the same way that segregationist governors in the 1950s and 1960s refused to obey federal court orders to admit black students. The Chicago Teachers Union proclaimed the push to reopen schools is based in sexism, racism, and misogyny. Black and Hispanic students suffered much larger learning losses due to school shutdowns, leading former Education Secretary John King to warn of a lost generation of students, despite a deluge of studies that showed that schools posed little risk of fueling the pandemic. Teachers insisted that they were entitled to both their salaries and to stay at home as long as they considered necessary. This was part of the collapse of the broader myth that the rulers and ruled have common interests. You know, the part where it says we're all in this together. Excuse me, bullshit. Something in my throat. Among other splits, the response to the pandemic divided Americans into those who work for a living and those who, quote-unquote, work for the government. Government employees in most states and at the federal level have been the untouchables, continuing to draw full pay even when they were no longer even required to show up for work. One exception to this trend is government tax collectors, who continue commandeering as much as ever from citizens and property owners, regardless of the collapse in public services in many places this year. Another myth that perished in 2020 was that social media and the internet could be a powerful propellant of free information. Instead, the biggest players pulled the most strings to suppress criticisms or dissent from the latest COVID policies promulgated by officialdom. On March 18th, Twitter announced that, in response to COVID-19, it would ban tweets guilty of denial of expert guidance or misleading content purporting to be from experts or authorities. The World Health Organization initially overestimated the COVID fatality rate by, 50-fold, but they remain Twitter approved. Facebook recently launched 4 more aggressive policies, including directly contacting anyone who liked or commented on a piece that was later ruled erroneous by Facebook guardians, and is refusing any ads that discourages people from getting vaccinations. Will they ban the World Health Organization's chief scientist, Soumya Swaminathan, for declaring on Monday that there was no evidence to be confident vaccine shots prevent transmission of COVID? Zucky? Google sought to suppress any doubts about lockdowns. Most users in English-speaking countries, when they Google Great Barrington Declaration, will not be directed to the declaration itself, but to articles that are critical of the declaration, a spiked online analysis noted. This year's presidential election put a hell of a dent in this credo that politicians rule with consent of the governed. The pandemic provided the pretext to radically change voting procedures, spurring 65 million mostly unverified mail-in ballots. The New York Times warned in 2012 that fraud in voting by mail is vastly more prevalent than the in-person voting fraud that has attracted far more attention. 2012, folks, New York Times. Many states solved that problem by defining down fraud and expunging the verification procedures previously used to routinely invalidate 20% or more of mailed-in ballots. The controversies around mail-in ballots, questionable software, ballot harvesting, and other practices mean that a record number of Americans will doubt Joe Biden's legitimacy even before he takes his oath of office. Perhaps the saddest casualty of 2020 is a myth that average Americans cherish their personal freedom. Politicians continually shifted the rationale for lockdowns from flattening the curve to ending community spread to reducing cases to near zero. Regardless of the proclaimed rationale, most people submitted without a fight, and usually without even a whimper. Politicians and bureaucrats fanned mass fears which quickly ripened into hatred of anyone who did not comply with the latest edict. States and cities across the country set up snitch lines that were soon deluged with complaints of people outside without a mask, meeting friends, or having more visitors in their homes than could fit in a phone booth. Many, if not most, people quickly acquiesced to the new normal, where any government hack who recited the phrase science and data became entitled to rule their lives with an iron fist. As a Harvard International Review warned, the very methods that liberal democracies are currently using to effectively fight the virus are the same tactics that authoritarian leaders use to dominate their people. The tools that have been temporarily deployed in a fight against a once-in-a-lifetime disease may become permanent. That was written on May 23rd, more than 15 million COVID cases ago. Proof of the failure of lockdowns and pervasive restrictions to make COVID-19 vanish. But the miserable batting average of officialdom will vanish into the memory hole if politicians launch a campaign to make COVID vaccinations mandatory, complete with boundless vilification of anyone who balks at the injection. Perhaps it has long been a myth that we live in a self-governing republic rather than a Leviathan democracy, where citizens merely make cameo appearances every few years at the voting booth. It is still possible that the catastrophic and pointless losses imposed by COVID crackdowns will finally awaken enough people to their growing subjugation. But the dangerous myth is that Americans will finally become safe after they cease making any efforts to leash their rulers. Reminds me of the old quote yet again. Those who trade their liberty for a little temporary safety will get a high degree of neither. Folks, I don't know about you, but I will always take dangerous liberty versus peaceful slavery any day. and 2021 will be the year of just that. And still continuing in the 2020 side, visualizing 2020's endless news cycle. Yes, it has been extremely hard to keep up with the deluge, the constantness, the fire hose being opened up. And this from somebody that's been doing this for a little bit, last 7 or 8 years. This year has been like no other. For those that follow me on Gab will know that I've been tracking the election-related stuff since November 3rd and now have acquired probably about 5,300 articles in my trove. We're watching history be made, of course, so it's best to capture that. And so, yes, a lot of competing narratives, things that all go hand in hand, a lot of dot connecting as well. All of this, the COVID, the election fraud, the Great Reset, all of it, all linked together, all the same players. So in 2020, what do we see? Well, 2020 seems like a blur, and it was. Amid the backdrop of global pandemic, ensuing lockdowns, and an election year, dozens of competing narratives overlap to provide nothing short of information overload. To help visualize this roller coaster, Axios is out with their 4th annual Google Trends chart. We have never seen a year like this in Google Trends history, said Google data editor Simon Rogers. These were huge stories that changed how we search. Since coronavirus and elections were the dominant themes, they were omitted from the analysis, and instead far more specific search terms were used, such as masks, Anthony Fauci, absentee ballots, and Joe Biden. And I'll drop this link out there for you guys to check out, because there is some visual aspects of this you guys will probably want to check out. We'll get to that. So via Axios, between the lines, the chart again reveals how short Americans' attention span can be, with surges in Google searches often lasting only a week for a given topic. And you can see this with 2020 topics like House Speaker Nancy Pelosi tearing up President Trump's State of the Union speech, Kobe Bryant's death, and the Beirut explosion. But several big topics saw multiple weeks of increased interest this year, such as masks, Prince Harry and Meghan Markle's exit from the royal family, the QAnon conspiracy theory, the record-breaking use of absentee ballots because of the pandemic, and the various investigations and conspiracy theories involving Hunter Biden. When coronavirus and elections are excluded, the deaths of Kobe Bryant generated the largest spike in searches of any other single news event, though it garnered just 10% of the search volume of those primary topics. And according to Rogers, searchers related to unemployment, hunger, and food were higher than they've ever been, while a search for elections around November 3rd overshadowed even coronavirus, the latter of which remained of high interest for longer. And it says, of course, you can see for yourself below, and it kind of walks through kind of an A to Z throughout the year, from January through now December, starting off with TikTok and masks and Qasem Soleimani, Australia bushfires, Prince Harry, Meghan, impeachment, Wuhan, Brexit, Kobe Bryant, Nancy Pelosi, Roger Stone, the stock market, and of course this I find interesting, they call it Trump coronavirus. Right. Tom Hanks, Anthony Fauci, hydroxychloroquine, martial law, and all the way down to and through Rudy Giuliani, Joe Biden, electoral fraud, Alex Trebek, 4 seasons total landscaping, and COVID-19 vaccine. So, just to highlight some of the stories of the year, in case you had forgotten, a lot took place this year. And that leads me to my next article. One that I always look forward to at the end of the year. Zero Hedge puts out their top 20 of the year based on viewership. And they've been doing this since 2009 or so. So this year is no different. It says 1 year ago, when looking at the 20 most popular stories of 2019, we pointed to a certain undertone of artificial stability permeating capital markets and society, with the economy firing on all cylinders, thanks to the massive dual deficits and debt that exploded under the current administration, with the market surging 30% last year and at all-time highs, despite flat earnings and entirely thanks to the Fed's resumption of not QE last September in order to bail out JP Morgan and a handful of hedge funds' treasury basis trades, and with Trump cruising to re-election victory in what we thought 1 year ago would be the most important even of 2020, the U.S. presidential election. It's also why we said that, with the Fed fully behind Trump and helping the S&P return nearly 30% in 2019, 4 more years of Trump is now virtually assured, barring some unexpected calamity in 2020. This was 1 year ago. Oh, how prudent that disclaimer proved to be, as well as the next caveat we casually mentioned in our last year review, warning that, with the 2020 elections looming, it is certainly true that anything can still happen, only as with all true black swans, it won't be what anyone had expected. And it certainly wasn't, because around the time we were penning our year-end wrap-up post exactly 1 year ago, a highly contagious coronavirus strain had escaped the Wuhan Institute of Virology, China's first and only biosafety 4 lab, whether purposely or intentionally, and was set to spread around the globe, unleashing the biggest global black swan in the past 100 years, triggering personal and economic hell for hundreds of millions around the world who lost their jobs or loved ones as a result of the China virus, markets nirvana for millions of 16-year-old Robin Hood and hedge fund traders who benefited from the greatest stock market rally in history, and ultimately helped Joe Biden emerge from complete obscurity and with virtually no chances of defeating Trump, to eventually winning the November 3rd presidential election, Trump's ongoing challenges to the outcome notwithstanding. Article continues, says the arrival of the virus that would eventually be called COVID-19 by the global scientific community, to remove any links to China, and which would lead to a historic pandemic, the likes of which nobody expected 1 year ago. Well, I'll pause right there and say, unless you went to Event 201 back in October of 2019, then yeah, you knew exactly what was about to play out. It shook the world, and would lead to a slew of historic events taking place in just a few months, including a staggering lockdown of the global economy, the official arrival of helicopter money, tens of trillions in fiscal and monetary stimulus, an overhaul of the global economy punctuated by an unprecedented explosion in world debt, an Orwellian crackdown on civil liberties by governments everywhere, and ultimately set the scene for what even the World Economic Forum called simply the Great Reset. Needless to say, it would be impossible to describe everything that happened in 2020, or all the black swans that the pandemic and its associated lockdowns let loose upon the world, in one article. Those looking for a detailed breakdown of all the major events this year are urged to read the latest magnum opus, Year in Review by David Cullum, and he's got a 2-part series in that he did. But a quick recap of some of the most prominent and bizarre events that shook the world in the past 365 days, what Mark Orsley called the Year of Years, is as follows. And some bullet items here are: World War III fears run rampant on social media as the U.S. strikes Iranian Army General Soleimani. Black Swan health event that leads to a historic equity market crash and funding strains. Fed takes U.S. policy raise to near 0% and institutes quantitative easing at a magnitude that puts the post-GFC period to shame. Treasury institutes trillions of dollars of fiscal stimulus. Unprecedented lockdowns lead to Tiger King craze. The world learns how to school and work remotely, changing the office space landscape forever. WTI front month contracts trades with a negative price. and that's West Texas Intermediate for the oil folks out there. A subsequent epic equity bull market recovery rally that pierces March highs. Australia burns. Kobe Bryant tragically dies. We begin to watch sports with no fans. Pentagon releases UFO footage. Qantas offers flights to nowhere. California wildfires burn uncontrollably and wipe out parts of Napa. U.S. social unrest turns violent. Murder hornets. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, finally, I might as well say, dies. Overhyped U.S. election event that leads to a volatility collapse, year-end rally. And a middle-aged skateboarder drinking cranberry juice to a 70s rock hit brings calm to the world. And apparently I must have missed that last one. That list could have gone on forever. The point is, there could not have been more regime shifts, volatility moments, and memes than 2020. We hope. Yet, for all the chaos and panic unleashed by COVID, a certain undertone of predetermination and almost tangible order was felt just below the surface. After all, the virus, crash, lockdown, and recession provoked an unprecedented monetary and fiscal policy panic, which sparked a record $22 trillion of stimulus in just the past 9 months around the world. As a result, central banks spent over $1 trillion a month on financial assets via QE, crushing yields, volatility, and spreads and pushing stocks to all-time highs at the end of 2020, even as earnings continue to slide. So, jumping down to their top 20, I'm going to skip some of the stuff in the middle here. We'll get down to the good stuff, because this is really where it's at. We get into this. Let's see. It says, in addition to the other themes noted above, we expected the crackdown on free speech to accelerate in the coming year, especially as the following list of top 20 articles for 2020 reveals. Many of the most popular articles in the past year were precisely those which the conventional media would not touch out of fear of repercussions, which in turn allowed the alternative media to continue to flourish in an orchestrated information vacuum and take significant market share from the established outlets by covering topics which the public relations arm of established media outlets refused to do, in the process earning itself the derogatory fake news condemnation. And we are grateful that our readers, who hit a new record high in 2020, have realized it is incumbent upon them to decide what is and isn't fake news. And notice that they did not say, oh, hey Facebook, hey Twitter, please censor this stuff from our eyes so that you can be the sole arbiters of truth. No, it's up to us. And so, before we get into the details of what has now become an annual tradition for the last day of the year, those who wish to jog down memory lane can refresh our most popular articles for every year during our no longer than brief, almost 11-year existence, starting with 2009 and continuing with all the way up to and through today in 2019. So without further ado, here are the articles that you, our readers, found to be the most engaging, interesting, and popular based on the number of hits during the past year. And I'll just go ahead and drop the link out there for you guys to follow along with. You guys can go back on subsequent years as well and follow those links as well. So in the 20th spot, with 690,000 readers, was an article that touched on one of the most sensitive topics of 2020, the origins of the COVID virus. As readers are all too aware, the great debate here has been whether the virus emerged due to something as innocuous as a Chinese citizen eating a bat soup, a narrative espoused by the China-controlled media, or if it escaped from a Wuhan biolab. And as AP journalists are now discovering, all signs increasingly point to the latter, something which Luc Montagnier, the man who discovered the HIV virus back in 1983, first said back in April, shocking the world with his claim that the virus was man-made. As we explained, and COVID-19 is a man-made virus, HIV discoverer says could only have been created in a lab. Eventually, he'll be proven correct, confirming once again that the biggest fake news is whatever the mainstream media pushes as the narrative du jour. And in the 19th spot of the year's most popular articles, we received another reminder that not all is as it seems when it comes to stoking tensions with U.S. society, as 718,000 readers clicked on a story pointing out that more bricks appear in advance of Monday demonstrations in Baltimore and Texas. While a wave of protests and violent riots swept across the nation, ostensibly as a grassroots movement condemning police violence against blacks, it had dramatic consequences across the country, leading to the defunding of countless police forces across mostly liberal cities, and yet many wondered about who the puppet master behind this wave of violence was. Because even as Jeff Gunlock mused recently, it's interesting how the violent riots of 2020 ended right after the election. Hopefully, one day someone will get to the bottom of who and how organized the protest deadly movement of the summer of 2020. In the 18th spot, addressing what may be the most critical topic of the next 4 years, nearly 720,000 readers were presented with a news report of Hunter Biden's relationship with China that first emerged. The blockbuster report, in which impressive detail revealed how the Biden family was compromised by China. The social networks were quick to censor any mention of the original report. However, just a few weeks later, and certainly after the election, we learned that Hunter was indeed being probed by tax evasion stemming from his shady Chinese deals, which sought just one thing: to buy favor with the family of Joe Biden. Of course, it won't be the first time foreign powers have sought such undue influence on U.S. politicians. After all, that's what the whole point behind the existence of the Clinton Foundation, which did nothing for starving African children or Haitian earthquake survivors, but sure made Bill and Hillary filthy rich. Pivoting from China's attempts to influence the White House, we once again find ourselves in the middle of the social unrest, which defined much of the summer of 2020. Only this time, there was a twist. 726,000 readers were fascinated by how an Antifa attempt to riot in a California suburb goes awry, when a group of Antifa protesters were met with instant justice at the hands of angry residents in the suburban town of Yucapaya, California. Unfortunately, we expect this violent left-right split across the heart of America to not only get worse in 2021, as none of the fundamental reasons for the growing anger and resentment across U.S. society has been addressed yet, and if anything, it has become the media's duty to stoke even more anger and hatred. Confirming the scientists at best can only make uneducated guesses about the future, especially if they have paid conflicts of interest, was an analysis from the early spring when the COVID pandemic was first sweeping across the country, and which found that all hospital beds in the U.S. will be filled with patients by about May 8th due to coronavirus. This article, which was based on official research and was the 16th most read of 2020, with some 764,000 views, merely showcased something that never happened. And in fact, the virus rapidly faded away as soon as virus containment measures were rolled out, but not before it demonstrated how the media successfully instills a sense of panic amid the population, which continues to this day, even as the most apocalyptic predictions postulated by scientists never actually came true. And of course, let's not forget we just saw what happened in the UK with somebody who decided to go film an empty hospital and was promptly arrested on what charges, I have no idea. It's just flat out tyranny. By now, a clear pattern is emerging. 2020 was without a doubt the year of COVID, and it also served as the foundation of the 15th most popular article of 2020, which discussed a chilling documentary mapping out likely origins of COVID-19. Some 767,000 readers got their first glimpse of COVID, not as a virus that emerged by accident in nature, but one that was created in a Chinese lab. More troubling was that the hint that China released the virus on purpose in hopes of overturning the socioeconomic status quo. While the jury of scientists is still out in the real origins of COVID, even if the broader public knows all too well where it came from. One thing is certain. The unprecedented transformation sparked by COVID left China as one of the biggest geopolitical winners. If nothing else, this should at least prompt some more questions about who stood to benefit from the release of the virus. And that's exactly right, cui bono. Who benefits at the end of the day? Well, perhaps the Klaus Schwabs, the Lord Maliks, and the Soroses of the world would purport to be the benefactors. COVID continued to dominate the most popular list, and the 14th most read article of 2020 with 820,000 views was a report that triggered the worst economic collapse since the Great Depression when, on March 12th, Trump finally bent under pressure and announced a ban on all travel from Europe, and the process triggering both widespread and targeted shutdowns that have lasted to this day, resulting in millions of job losses and countless small and medium business failing in response to the shotgun approach to deal with the pandemic, which, while crippling most of the population, made a handful of ultra-rich investors and megacorporations extremely rich. The 13th most popular article of 2020 touched on the year's other biggest event, the U.S. presidential election, and whose outcome Trump contests to this day as a result of countless alleged fraudulent votes being cast on November 3rd. Some 830,000 readers were interested to learn how and why Trump's then lawyer Sidney Powell intended to overturn election results in multiple states. So far, that has not happened, and in fact it is unlikely that it will after the Supreme Court refused to hear Trump's challenge last month. That said, with 3 weeks to go until the inauguration, Trump still refuses to concede, although it remains unclear on what grounds he hopes to launch any upcoming legal challenges, even as Joe Biden has already hired his movers in preparation for his transition to the White House. For the 12th most popular article of the year, we once again shift back to COVID, and specifically China's massive obfuscation campaign, according to which the country, which sparked the global COVID pandemic, has had less than 100,000 cases, even as the rest of the world has around 500,000 new cases daily. Beijing's facade of lies almost cracked in February, when as asked whether China's Tencent actually accidentally leaked the true terrifying coronavirus statistics. It did, but since the truth in China has a half-life that is shorter than a virus in the wild, everyone quickly moved on, and to this day, the world continues to drink some bizarre Kool-Aid, according to which China has just a handful of new cases daily. The 11th most popular article of the year was something different. It had to do with what may have well been the most underreported story of 2020 and 2019, the crimes of Jeffrey Epstein and his powerful, rich pedophilia friends. Of course, most of Epstein's secrets died with him when he committed suicide, quote-unquote, in the summer of 2019, although some hope for justice remains, and it is tied to the ongoing incarceration of Epstein's madame and girlfriend Ghislaine Maxwell, who knew everything and everyone in Jeffrey's circle. It's also why 835,000 read the article laying out the top highlights from Ghislaine Maxwell's unsealed court records. Unfortunately, so far, Ghislaine has refused to shine a light into the true scandal surrounding Epstein and his friends, and we are confident that if it were to ever change, then the daughter of Robert Maxwell, who died in mysterious circumstances back in 1991, will face a similar fate. With 864,000 page views, the 10th most popular story of 2020 was neither COVID nor Trump, nor Epstein related, but instead exposed China's giant gold counterfeiting underworld, as we explained in 83 tons of fake gold bars, gold market rocked by massive China counterfeiting scandal. Over the years, there has been much speculation about just how much of the $11 trillion notional in above-ground gold is legitimate, and how much gold-plated tungsten, and the shocking news that emerged out of China in June underscored that one should always check the authenticity of one's gold holdings, especially if there is any link to China, the country that has taken counterfeiting to an art. Having entered the top 10 most popular stories of 2020, we find that COVID makes another appearance in ninth spot with 915,000 reads, this time with the claims made by a top pathologist, Dr. Roger Hodgkinson, who made the shocking allegation that the coronavirus is the greatest hoax ever perpetrated on an unsuspecting public, and claimed that there is utterly unfounded public hysteria driven by the media and politicians. It's outrageous. This is the greatest hoax ever perpetrated on an unsuspecting public. One can easily see why any reference to the story or the doctor was promptly scrubbed by the world's social media censors, who have taken it upon themselves to also be fact-checkers on any claim related to COVID. Even if, as we reported previously, most of those fact-checkers are deeply conflicted individuals who have a vested interest in perpetuating the far more lucrative fake narrative about COVID. In the 8th spot, with just a few hundred more page views, was our report about the scientific analysis conducted on voting patterns in the November 3rd election. In It Defies Logic, Scientists Finds Telltale Signs of Election Fraud After Analyzing Mail-in Ballot Data, we showed a statistical analysis which strongly suggested that fraud occurred on election night, when several swing states inexplicably stopped reporting vote counts while President Trump maintained a healthy lead over Joe Biden. To this date, this remains a deeply polarizing issue, and even though the courts, including SCOTUS, have refused to investigate further, millions of Americans believe that there are telltale signs that Biden's victory on November 3rd was not proper, and is why so many Americans refuse to accept Joe Biden as their president. With just over 1.1 million page views and in the 7th spot, was the article that got us suspended for 6 months from Twitter. Is this the man behind the global coronavirus pandemic? We asked if Wuhan Institute of Virology scientist Peng Zhao, whose data was available publicly to anyone, was the person responsible for unleashing the pandemic. While Twitter unceremoniously banned our account for merely asking this question, a few months later the joke was on Jack Dorsey, after we reported that Western spy agencies investigating Wuhan scientists highlighted by Zero Hedge in January. Of course, since the question of China's involvement in the creation and spread of the COVID virus has tremendous political consequences, so far there has been no official finding or conclusion either way. The 6th most popular article of 2020 was another notable question, probing the validity of the November election, namely, why does Biden have so many more votes than Democrat senators in swing states? Another way of asking the same question, which 1,113,129 readers also wanted answered, was, what's going on here? If it were never Trumpers pairing Biden with their GOP congressional picks, wouldn't one expect fewer votes for Trump than GOP senators? So far, we have not received an answer. Questions about the credibility of the presidential election continued into the top 5 posts as well, and with 1,245,000 was our post covering the roller coaster event which was the November 3rd election, which had Biden winning at first, then odds overwhelmingly shifted in Trump's favor after he won Florida and Ohio, only to see Biden be declared winner after mail-in votes in most swing states came overwhelmingly in Biden's favor. Not surprisingly, Trump blasts vote count delays as fraud on the American public, and yet it was precisely those same vote counts, as well as various documented reports of mystery ballot boxes emerging in the deep of the night, that ultimately handed Biden the election. Trump is still contesting the outcome. The devastating consequences from the COVID pandemic may have been more limited than many expected. largely thanks to an unprecedented fiscal and monetary stimulus, which made life especially easy for companies that had access to capital markets. However, it was quite the opposite for millions of small and medium businesses for whom the PPP loans handed out at the peak of the COVID crisis provided at best a brief respite. As a result, and as we reported in Bankruptcy Tsunami Begins, thousands of default notices are flying out the door, while over 1.2 million readers were shocked to learn just how bad the economy was for all those mom-and-pop small business operators who had no choice but to fold as the lockdowns resulting from the COVID pandemic crippled the service economy and led to a historic bankruptcy filing spree. The third most popular article 2020, read over 1.3 million times, had to do with another topic which the mainstream media would not come within 10 feet of, namely, whether or not the highly popular Black Lives Matter movement was credible, or if it was just another way of sabotaging the popular narrative in hopes of benefiting a certain social class. One person who took the other side of the argument was an anonymous Berkeley professor who shredded the BLM injustice narrative, only to be met with a furious rebuke from Berkeley, which ironically validated one of the letter's core claims that dissent outside a tightly policed, narrow discourse is not welcome. Sadly, to this day, any truly open discourse on the topic of whether BLM's claims are valid remains taboo, and is the surest and quickest way to ending one's career. Hashtag cancel culture, right? 2 to go, folks. The year's second most popular article, with just over 1.5 million reads, was also an example of conventional media cracking down on anything it found disagreeable to the popular narrative. Shortly after the first reports of COVID spread, we published our take on a research report which found that coronavirus contains HIV insertions, stoking fears over artificially created bioweapon. This prompted an immediate panic among the fact-checkers, whose job was to perpetuate the mainstream narrative, and they promptly conceded that while HIV insertions are present, such insertions can also be found in other viruses. Unfortunately, their attempts to discredit the theory that COVID was a man-made bioweapon have so far failed to be scientifically validated, while COVID's surprising ability to mutate and force the immune system to attack the host body itself, which are now widely accepted even by the so-called scientists, have failed to ease concerns that COVID is, in many ways, an airborne version of HIV. Finally, in the top spot, and cementing 2020's status as the year of COVID, was an article from March that tried to take on the mass hysteria spread by everyone from conflicted politicians to conflicted mainstream media to conflicted pharma companies, all of which had a vested interest in creating the biggest ever crisis possible. With 1.7 million page views in COVID-19 Evidence Over Hysteria, we laid out one take, why the widespread panic resulting from COVID may be ultimately self-defeating, especially when juxtaposed side by side with the far greater and far wider-reaching economic damage sparked by lockdowns. Alas, to this day, the hysteria dominates, confirming the old saying to let no crisis go to waste, especially when the crisis in question is the biggest one in generations and allows the establishments to roll out socially and economically transformational changes that would never be possible without the scapegoat that is COVID. With all that is behind us, and as we wave goodbye to another bizarre, exciting, surreal year, what lies in store for 2021 and the next decade? We don't know. As frequent and not so frequent readers are aware, we do not pretend to be able to predict the future, and we don't try despite endless allegations that we constantly predict the collapse of civilization. We leave the predicting to the smartest people in the room, who year after year have been consistently wrong about everything, and never more so than in 2020, which destroyed the reputation of central banks, of economists, conventional media, and the professional polling and strategist class forever. We merely observe, try to find what is unexpected, entertaining, amusing, surprising, or grotesque in an increasingly bizarre, sad, and increasingly crazy world, and then just write about it. We do know, however, that after a record $22 trillion in stimulus, what has been conjured out of thin air by the world's central banks and politicians in just the past 9 months, as helicopter money makes a triumphant arrival in both the U.S. and Eurozone, and as interest rates are on the cusp of breaking out, the entire world is floating on an ocean of excess money, which in 2020 once again succeeded in masking just how ugly the truth beneath the calm surface is. We are confident, however, that in the end it will be the very final backstoppers of the status quo regime, the central banking emperors of the new normal, who will eventually be revealed as fully naked. When that happens, and what happens after, is anyone's guess. But as we have promised and delivered every year for the past 12, we will be there to document every aspect of it. Finally, and as always, we wish all our readers the best of luck in 2021, with much success in trading and every other avenue of life. We bid farewell to 2020 with our traditional and unwavering year-end promise. Zero Hedge will be there each and every day, usually with a cynical smile, helping readers expose, unravel, and comprehend the fallacy, fiction, fraud, and farce that the system is reduced to using, or abusing, each and every day just to keep this grand tragic comedy going for at least one more year. There you go. Top 20 as reported by Zero Hedge. So does that sum it up for you guys? Lots of COVID certainly dominating the news. Perhaps maybe you might have forgotten about a few of those. In fact, we saw Kobe Bryant pass away in a tragic helicopter accident. Wildfires and that, not only here in the States, but also down in Australia. I think that was clear back in January, if I'm not mistaken. And all sorts of in-betweens. Finally saw RBG wheeled off ice and put to pasture at a very convenient time. And so, what is 2021 going to bring? It's going to be very, very interesting, right? And not to be outdone, TechCrunch has their top 10 stories of 2020 as well. Just to highlight a few of these before the top of the hour here. They're talking about the VCs who founders love the most, venture capitalists. That was one of their top 20. 2 API startups are so hot right now for those that follow tech and the markets. No code will define the next generation of software, tracking the growth of low-code and no-code startups, number 4. Number 5, EdTech is no longer optional. Investors deep dive into the future of the market. Let's see, what else? Number 6, B2B marketplaces will be the next billion-dollar e-commerce startups. Business to business. Number 7, Facebook's former PR chief explains why no one is paying attention to your startup. Interesting. Number 8, you need a minimum viable company, not a minimum viable product. And of course, you see what has come out of Silicon Valley and all these companies who have no business plans whatsoever, and all the VCs pour dollars into it only to find that they'll never turn a profit. Well, you kind of get a glimpse of what that means. Netflix is a pretty good example of that. Number 9, 6 investment trends that could emerge from the COVID-19 pandemic. Number 1, the future of work promoting intimacy and trust. Number 2, healthcare IT, telemedicine and remote patient monitoring. 3, robotics and supply chain. 4, cybersecurity. Gee, you think? Number 5, education equals knowledge transfer plus social plus signaling. And 6, fintech, financial tech. Number 10 on the list, construction tech startups are poised to shake up a $1.3 trillion industry. Number 11, don't let VCs be the gatekeepers of your success. Venture capitalists. So there we go. Out of TechCrunch, their top 10. And there's plenty of stories out there, a lot of year-end wrap-ups. These are just a couple on that I thought were rather interesting for the year. Many more we'll discuss on subsequent firesides in the future. And I suppose I've got maybe about 10 minutes here before we wrap things up here and ring in the new year. Another article out of the Burning Platform, again by Jim Quinn. It says, "Give me liberty or give me a face diaper." A pretty good read. Unfortunately, it's somewhat of a tragic comedy, I suppose. I'll just hit the highlights of this real quick. It says, 1 month ago I wrote an article, Silent Obedient Consent, about our day in Cape May Lighthouse State Park and my disappointment in seeing so many perfectly healthy young people obediently wearing their face muzzles, as dictated by government bureaucrats on a bright, crisp autumn day in a 244-acre state wildlife preserve. I found it sad that so many could be controlled by so easily by so few. And since my state has been in lockdown since our escape to Cape May, and the weather has been cold, wet, and snowy, we've been mostly cooped up in our home prison. The fear propaganda campaign has worked wonders, as our traditional Christmas Eve bash with 50 or so relatives and neighbors was limited to 6 relatives. Monday, when I saw the temperature was going to 48 with bright sunshine, I insisted we needed to go to the 3,500-acre Valley Forge National Park to take a long walk. And, of course, says we lived 11 miles from Valley Forge Park for the last 25 years. I'm a student of history, living close to a national treasure. Ragtag army of farmers showed tremendous fortitude and courage during the brutal, deathly winter of 1777 and 78, and has been an endless source of enjoyment and learning for me, my wife, and sons. The walking trails wind through beautiful rolling hills of trees, dotted with soldier quarters as they appeared 242 years ago. Many an afternoon did we hike up Mount Joy over the mountain to reach General Washington's headquarters. The museum on the headquarters site is filled with interactive displays describing the tremendous sacrifices made by these men to keep the hopes of a fledgling country alive. You can't help but be inspired by the bravery and courage of these men. They left their families and were willing to die for a cause that seemed unreachable. They were willing to sacrifice their lives to gain freedom from tyrannical monarch mandates. The park rangers have always been friendly and helpful. We signed our 2 youngest sons up for a program where we took them there every Saturday, and they were trained as recruits in the Continental Army with pretend muskets. It was fun for them, and they learned about an important event in the founding of our country. Our 3 boys were full of energy, and we could do the 5-mile trek around the park every time. They would rollerblade, scooter, or walk, but we always made 2 stops. One was a battery of cannons, where they would imagine blasting some redcoats. The other was a huge climbing tree, which we assumed was around in 1778, when General Baron von Steuben was drilling the Continental Army recruits, instilling discipline and teaching them tactics. Picturing the past heroic actions of true patriots is easy to do at Valley Forge. When we could get them down from the branches, we would set the timer on our camera and take a picture for posterity. All my memories of time at Valley Forge Park were positive, until this past Monday. Once again, I was aghast at what I witnessed on a sunny, brisk winter day. At first, I was surprised at the huge number of cars in the parking lot. Many people had the same idea, as indoor dining has been banned by Generalissimo Baron von Wolf for the last month. Our level of enthusiasm for enjoyable trek around this national treasure of a park waned immediately as we witnessed hundreds upon hundreds of young people, families, bikers, and joggers fully muzzled, as demanded by COVID czar Dick/Rachel Levine and dictator-in-chief Tom Wolfe. We were going to enjoy our unmasked walk no matter how many compliant sheep we had to pass. Lone bikers, near no one, were masked. Lone joggers were masked. One jogger would pull up her mask when she passed someone and then pull it down after passing. Little kids were masked, mothers, fathers, teens on dates, and young guys were all masked. I couldn't help but think how government school indoctrination had worked wonders on these obedient serfs. Have years of helicopter parenting created such a pathetic generation of infant-like rule followers? Are they so willingly ignorant that they can't do the basic research to realize masks don't work based on CDC studies and the actual case rates in states and cities with mandatory masking and lockdowns? Based on my observations, at least 60% of these people out getting exercise and fresh air, not too fresh with a filthy diaper on their faces, or obeying their tyrannical politicians and bureaucrats, or entrapped in fear by a flu with a 99.7% survival rate. We didn't have the slightest hesitancy in walking next to or passing other resistors, aka anti-maskers, aka granny killers, who chose to live on the edge by breathing fresh air. I never have a problem choosing not to be one of the crowd and not following the lemmings. The most embarrassing aspect of our afternoon was when fully masked sheeple would take a wide berth into the grass when they saw we were unmuzzled. They treated us like plague-carrying super spreaders. This happened at least a half-dozen times. When we passed two young fully masked parents pushing a stroller with an infant sucking on his pacifier, I jokingly said to my wife that I should patent a mask with a built-in pacifier. Too late. They already sell them on the internet. We truly must be living in some dystopian Twilight Zone episode. If it was in my power, anyone who willingly wears a mask in the fresh air should be required to wear this mask. It would represent the infantilization of Americans during this era of idiocracy. We have a nation of infants sucking on pacifiers while trapped in their cribs by sociopathic parents/politicians. Infants are incapable of critical thought, must be fed to survive, and diapered at all times. Sounds like the majority of adult Americans today, except the diaper is on the other end. As we passed maskers by the dozens on the walking path, I found myself wondering if any of these people appreciated the irony of the cowardice and dishonor shown to those brave, honorable men who spent a brutal winter battling bitter snow and cold, starvation, typhus, smallpox, dysentery, and the threat of attack from the most powerful army on the planet, only 30 miles away in Philadelphia. These men face death every moment of their existence. Meanwhile, our current army of Valley Forge maskers cower from the phantom menace of a highly non-lethal flu bug. There are hundreds of statues scattered throughout the park, honoring the patriots who made the ultimate sacrifice to create a new nation of self-reliant, strong, independent-minded citizens who didn't require coddling by a massive, overbearing federal government. They just wanted to be left alone, to work their farms, raise their families, and live as free men. Statues to honor our current-day heroes would look like this. And unfortunately, this picture shows a mask on one of the statues. When assessing the state of our nation, it's always a prudent choice to seek out the wisdom of our founding father who led the troops at Valley Forge, George Washington. I think the quote below captures the essence of what has been happening in this country over the last 10 months. The downward spiral crisis in this country is reflected in the apparent trivial submission of a vast swath of the populace to a psychotic belief a thin piece of cloth will save them from a moderately annoying flu that won't kill 99.9% of Americans. This is a turning point in the history of our country, and not one which will go down in glory. Taught in history books is a story of courageousness, fortitude, bravery, and common sense. The turning points of our lives are not the great moments. The real crises are often concealed in occurrences so trivial in appearance that they pass unobserved. Quote by George Washington. If General George Washington was alive today, he would be praying for the end of this societal mass delusion and for our leaders who are not cunning, ambitious, unprincipled, and intent on destroying everything he fought for during those times that tried men's souls. The subversion of power by a cadre of extremely wealthy globalist traders has succeeded beyond their expectations. And I will pause right there, come back to it on the other side here momentarily. So get ready, folks. We'll kick out 2020 with a bang. And Happy New Year, everybody. Welcome to 2021 here in the central part of the country. Good to have you still aboard here for this fireside chat this evening. 2021 finally arrived. Kick 2020 to the curb. So to continue on, says the future of our country hangs in the balance, just as it did in the winter of 1777 and 78. The question is whether we remain sunshine patriots wearing masks as demanded by the monarchy, or will we stand now, shed our masks, and fight the tyranny engulfing this nation? The choice is ours. However, political parties may now and then answer popular ends. They are likely in the course of time and things to become potent engines by which cunning, ambitious, and unprincipled men will be enabled to subvert the power of the people and to usurp for themselves the reins of government, destroying afterwards the very engines which have lifted them to unjust dominion. That by George Washington. So there you have it, folks. That's what we'll end on here this evening. Again, looking at where we are, top 20 stories, at least out of Zero Hedge. A couple dominant themes. The COVID, the fraud perpetuated via the election. Are we going to let it stand, or are we going to take back this country? I think that's ultimately what it boils down to, right? So, appreciate you guys sticking with me here for the evening. Again, welcome to 2021. We're going to continue to bring the news, as we have, across the channels. 5x5 included, my channels, everybody else's channels that you guys follow. It's going to be a bang-up year. Definitely going to be a bang-up year. And I hope you guys will join us in this fight to and through this information warfare, the war on for the mind. Time to stand, folks. It's time to stand. David F. says the best is yet to come. I certainly hope so. It's time for the winds of change to blow through. And if we learned anything out of the Great Conjunction, some of the articles and that I've covered in that regard, you know, about every 400 years we see the winds of change take place, right? And we are upon that precipice. So let's make it a good one. Again, appreciate you guys tuning in for this special New Year's Eve edition, ringing in the new year. And we'll see you back here real soon. Take care. God bless everybody.